Hello, everybody, and you are very welcome as you all join us today. I see regular familiar names joining us. Thank you for joining us again. I see new names joining us. You're all very welcome to Behavioural Science Club, and this week is especially special for myself. Our special guest this week is Dr. Aiden Carthy. And Aiden is the lecturer in TU Dublin, Technological University of Dublin. He is also the director of the relatively recently set up of, I'm going to look across to read the correct title, the Research Centre for Psychology, Education and Emotional Intelligence. You're very welcome, Aiden.
Thank you so much. I'm genuinely delighted to be here. I'm really excited to be here, and it's a real honor. And I would like to start by saying that I'm in awe of what you're doing through Behavioural Science Club. I think it's fantastic. It's lovely that you've got such a community of learning, and in particular that it's such a collaborative community. So I'm expecting a mutual exchange of ideas today. I think I'm probably going to walk away after the next hour, or however long it's going to be, having learned more, or acquired more knowledge than I'm going to share. Do you want me to start my presentation?
So thanks very much, Aiden. I was just going to say that for myself, and I don't know about any of our other members today, my only knowledge of what is emotional intelligence is this extremely outdated book, 25 years old now, I think, but possibly a classic in the field, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. So obviously we're very interested to know where we're at today with emotional intelligence. I know it's something you're very much involved with, Aiden. So I will hand over to you now, and Aiden has a very interesting presentation to talk us through. So enjoy, follow the presentation, and as usual, in about 30 minutes, we will go to members Q&A, but for the moment, sit back and enjoy everything that we are going to learn from Dr. Aiden Carthy. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much.
Very much.
Thanks, Louise. I'm always saying this, that one of my biggest detractions as an academic is that I'm not terribly computer literate. So I'm actually more serious than you might imagine when I say that in my world, I think I should be presented with a medal every time I manage to switch on the lights. So let's see if I can manage to share my screen. Oops, I've gone a little forward. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's perfect. We can see perfectly, Aiden.
Brilliant, excellent. Okay. I wasn't entirely sure how much knowledge of emotional intelligence people would have. So I wanted to start by giving, indeed, just a general introduction to the topic, what emotional intelligence is, how it works in practice, how it might be tested, and what that means for us in practical, everyday terms. So I'm going to start by telling you about what I think is a very simple but a really interesting piece of research that was conducted quite some time ago. In 1987, there were researchers Sternberg and Dieterman, and in the field of intelligence, they got 24 experts in the field of intelligence, and they asked them a simple question to define what intelligence is. And surprisingly, because these were experts in the field, they got 24 different answers from the 24 different experts. So intelligence and emotional intelligence in particular is surprisingly difficult to define because, of course, it's context dependent. It's impacted by multiple factors. And then there are big questions that we still don't fully have an answer to as of yet, and that I would in fact argue there isn't, indeed one correct answer to, such as the extent to which intelligence or emotional intelligence is determined by genetic influences, versus our social context or our life experience. Now, I don't have enough time today to delve into that particular topic in any great depth, but I thought it might be interesting, if possible, to actually see if we can, sorry, I'm just clicking onto the chat, through the chat, if we could replicate that really simple experiment. So I have 3 questions that you can see on the screen. What do you think emotional intelligence is, firstly? What sorts of skills would someone possess if they had a high level of emotional intelligence? And how might these skills be of value in everyday life, in college or elsewhere? I won't spend a huge amount of time on this, but I just thought it might be interesting, like I said, to replicate that kind of simple piece of research and to make this a little more active and get you involved. So through the chat function, if you would like to, would you like to just, even in a word or two, tell me, what do you think emotional intelligence is? Empathy, yes. Controlling our emotions. The ability to understand someone's internal thoughts and feelings. Empathy coming up a second time, reading other people. Street smarts, yes, I agree. I totally agree with you. I think it is about street smarts. Self-control, yes, absolutely. Being able to control when required our emotional responses, self-awareness, being aware of our emotions, and effective communication, absolutely. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. How do you think we would know if someone had a high level of emotional intelligence? What might that look like? What sorts of skills would they have? The ability to regulate our expressions, good listening skills, absolutely. Yeah, being adaptable is key, particularly in challenging situations. Yes, Camilla, I agree. Being popular in social circles, interesting. Flexibility, yeah, absolutely. Okay, like I've said, I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this. Respond not just to what a person did, but to the emotion behind that action. Absolutely, yes. Gosh, you're coming across as being expert in the field of emotional intelligence. So let's look at 2 definitions. I'm going to draw your attention first of all to the lower one. This was particularly interesting to me, in fact, because just yesterday I discovered that emotional intelligence is now included not only in the Cambridge English Dictionary, that's obviously the definition I have here, but in most of the standard dictionaries that you'll find online or elsewhere now. And it's interesting to me in particular because in the field of psychology, we've been speaking about emotional intelligence for quite some time, but it's only fairly recently that emotional intelligence has been gaining a lot of traction in the academic world, and that people's understanding generally of emotional intelligence is starting to increase. So I thought it was interesting that it was included, that it was defined in the Cambridge English Dictionary. If we look to that first definition, Baron is one of the key researchers in the field of emotional intelligence, a seminal, in fact, researcher, and I think he makes a very bold claim. It's a claim that I would certainly accord with. He claims that the personal, social and survival dimensions, as he refers to them, of intelligence are in fact more important for our daily functioning than the cognitive aspects, the traditional cognitive aspects of intelligence. So we need to ask, what does this mean? How does this apply in everyday life? What does it mean in our everyday lives? So just you collectively have, pretty accurately, in fact, defined what emotional intelligence is. This seems almost insultingly simple, doesn't it? When we say that emotional intelligence consists of just these 2 things, understanding and accurately expressing our own emotions, and understanding and appropriately responding to the emotions of others. As I said, that seems almost, too simplistic. And yet, when we think about this, if you contemplate this a little, you might be forgiven for thinking that if you feel an emotion, surely, we must know when we have an emotion what it is that we're actually feeling. And yet it's sometimes surprisingly difficult to do so for a number of reasons. Firstly, we will typically feel more than, one emotion at the same time. Our emotions will blend. Emotion can also be something that is habit forming. We can fall into the habit of feeling a certain way or of expecting to feel a certain way, such that we fail, at times to notice that we're doing so. Stress in particular can be something that, if it's an ongoing experience, that, we can often almost tune out. We get so used to, perhaps feeling a certain level of stress that we stop noticing it, that stress is there. So we don't always accurately label our own emotions. We don't always accurately appreciate the level at which we're feeling an emotion. And it's understandable why, if someone is in a very stressful situation, on an ongoing basis, that as a coping mechanism, they might, want to tune that out. But in terms of a healthy response to stress, it may not be very useful to do so, because it robs us of the opportunity to actually address what it is that is causing that stress. So in terms of what emotional intelligence is, as you can see, two broad categories: understanding our own emotions, having self-awareness, and having self-regard. Feeling a positive sense of regard for ourselves, and then dealing appropriately and responding appropriately to the emotions of others. Having empathy, for example, appreciating what it is that someone else is experiencing, having healthy interpersonal relationships, etc. So how do we test for emotional intelligence? If you were to take a test of EI, what sorts of concepts or constructs would that include? The Baron is just one model of EI. There are various tests that are typically used in the field of EI. This is just an example of one. One of, again, I don't have the time to discuss this in depth today, but one of the big questions that we have in EI, or the big debates in EI, is the extent to which emotional intelligence is trait-based versus being competency-based. So the extent to which emotional intelligence is a trait, or akin to an aspect of our personality, versus being a competency or a skill. What I can tell you, I am aware of the fact that I am, glossing over one of the, biggest debates in EI. But in summary, what I can tell you is that, pretty unanimously, all theorists in this field do concur that, at least to some extent, I suppose you're talking about the nature-nurture debate, really, as to and how that applies in the field of EI. At least to some extent, there is a genetic programming or a genetic underpinning to emotional intelligence, but to some extent, it is also open to social change, or it is something that we can, a skill that we can develop. So coming back to this particular model of EI, referred to as a 1-5-15, so akin to taking a test of IQ, or cognitive intelligence, you'll have one overall score for emotional intelligence, kind of like the equivalent of an IQ. There are then 5 composite areas, or 5 generic areas that you'll receive scores for, and then 15 individual scores. So I'll show you specifically what they are. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory, but I would draw your attention perhaps to self-actualization, which is in the middle there in the intra personal area. It doesn't really work such that that any aspect of emotional intelligence could be considered more important than any other. That's not really how things work. That said, self-actualization, a lot of researchers in this field, me included, would believe is a particularly important aspect of emotional intelligence. Self-actualization for psychologists, when we speak about self-actualization, take it to mean our ability, broadly speaking, to set meaningful goals for ourselves in our lives, and to feel that we're being true to our inner convictions and living the best life that we can. So just for a moment, a very simple statement, yet one that I certainly would believe is a very profound statement to reflect on. You are unique in all the world. That's it. You are unique in all the world. There never has been, and there never again will be on this planet an individual who is exactly like you. So that means that the contribution that you make to the world, what you bring to the world, is unique, and that is something that we should celebrate. As I've said, a very simple statement, but quite a profound one, I think, to contemplate. In terms of self-actualization, something else maybe to reflect on would be this. Think about what your core values are. What are the values that are most important to you in life? That might be honesty, it might be kindness, but whatever those core values are, here's something to reflect on in that regard. With respect to those values, how do they actualize in your life? How do they materialize in your relationships with other people, in your working life, in your life in general? And what might you be able to do to bring more of that value, whatever it is that's most important to you, into your life? I suppose what we're doing when we reflect in this regard is trying to tap into, our core values. And when we're acting in a manner that's in tandem with our core values, that can help us and that can promote a sense of self-actualization. So just an example of the types of things that we might work on in the realm of emotional intelligence and how that might work. So obviously one of the most important questions that we need to ask, can emotional intelligence be improved? I've already touched on this. Absolutely it can. There is now, without exaggeration, a wealth of research and a wealth of studies that has demonstrated that emotional intelligence, to some extent, as I've said, to some extent, it will be, as personality is, to some extent, it will be genetic. But to some extent, in fact, to quite a large extent, it is possible to improve, and to, through coaching, either individually or in group sessions, it is possible to improve our level of emotional intelligence. So how might that work? I just thought it would be interesting to look at some really simple examples as to how emotional intelligence might be improved, both at an organizational level and at an individual level. So something that could work as an organizational strategy or at an organizational level would be simply creating an organizational charter where you poll the members of a given group or an organization, depending on the context, and you ask, it's a very simple question, what are the top 3 feelings that you would like to promote in this organization or in this group? Or you could ask, as I did earlier with respect to the reflection around self-actualization, what are the values that are most important to us? And then the next step from that is obviously to ask, well, what are we going to do to promote these feelings, or to promote these values? How are we going to bring them into our organisation? How are we going to bring them into our organisational design, into our strategies, etc.? Or you could ask for strategies to focus on to promote healthy professional relationships in our group, or in our workplace, etc. With respect to the individual, and this also works, of course, at a group level. A huge amount of the work that's done, not only in emotional intelligence, but I'm sure, as you all know, in behavioural science, uses this, very simple ABC model. Conceptually, it's a really simple model, but in practice, it's a really powerful tool in terms of promoting behaviour change or promoting emotional awareness. So we simply look at the A's, B's and C's, antecedents, behaviours and consequences. So particularly when there are roadblocks or when there are issues that tend to crop up for an individual or in an organisation again and again, it might be useful to ask, well, what has brought us, to this point? How did we get here? Are there particular triggers, for example, that we might need to be aware of? What is this, the situation at hand in the moment? How is it dealt with? What strategies are used? And then what's the consequence of those? So that the strategies that we're currently using, either as an individual or at a group-based level, are those strategies working effectively, or are there more effective strategies that we might be able to use in their place? I would say at this point, I suppose, that, again, this possibly presents as being quite simplistic, arguably, insultingly so, and yet it's not very different, I would say, to the area of physical health. I think, for example, all of the things that doctors and healthcare experts tell us all the time about our physical health. We all know a lot of this. We know that we should be eating healthily. We know that we should be, trying to be physically active, and so on. But sometimes putting it into practice isn't always quite so easy. And it's the same here with EI. I say this all of the time, that, a lot of the things that I say and that others, in my field would say, are likely not to be terribly surprising to people. It might be things that, perhaps you already know or are aware of. But what's important is that we do put them into practice, that we remind ourselves as to why, this is important and the value of doing so, and that we bring our attention to it. So the ultimate goal, whether it be either at an individual or a group level, using the ABC model, is essentially to try and address, where we can, unhelpful or unhealthy patterns, and to take an unhelpful or an unhealthy pattern and try to replace it with a more positive or a more adaptive, as we would say in psychology, behavior, or and to set healthier goals for ourselves. So at the individual level, then, the sorts of things that we could do, and these are just some examples. Manage our stress a little better, look at our our lifestyle, awareness of triggers, particularly in terms of looking at the ABC model and how that works, looking at what available strategies and what available help there is, it is sometimes something that is a simple step that we can take, and so on. So I want to move on now and just give you a little idea as to how research is conducted and in the field of emotional intelligence. So our research centre, PEEI, the Research Centre for Psychology, Education and Emotional Intelligence, I want to give you an example of two studies that we've been involved with, just to show you in practice, how this might work. One is a study that has been completed, and the other is a study that's currently ongoing. So, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, haven't I? So just basic information about our website, about our research centre. Our website, our URL is there on the screen, and please do check out our website. As Louise said when I was being introduced, we're a relatively new research centre. We were formed and officially launched in 2018. And we focus on two main areas of research, mental health or well-being and applied education. And when I say applied education, what I mean by that, by the way, is that what we do in particular is conduct research and take theory in emotional intelligence and then develop interventions that we can apply in practice to help educators, students and others in the educational space to reach their maximum potential. So it's quite an applied, approach that we have. So sorry, I skipped ahead there and had to go back to that slide. So example of some research that we've previously conducted, walking football. I would say this was a very interesting study for me to be involved with. I have zero interest in sport. If it was possible to register a minus interest in sport, I would. So I was very surprised to be asked in the first instance to be involved in this research. And it was a wonderful study to be part of. And so much more than I freely admit I thought it was going to be. It was a study that was conducted in partnership with the Football Association of Ireland and Age Action Ireland. And our goal was to target elder males in particular, because this is a cohort that are often quite socially isolated. So the reason that I was involved in the study was, to focus on this aspect of the study, which was, social connectedness. So what we wanted to do is see if a walking football intervention would have a positive impact on physical health and on social connectedness for a cohort of elder adults. So very briefly, what we did was, it was a standard test, pre-test, post-test design. We recruited our participants. They took a huge range, in fact, of measures before and after the intervention. Their fitness was assessed. They were given an assessment of social connectedness. And then once a week for 6 weeks, they met as a group. They played a game of walking football, which, as the name suggests, involves playing football, but where you walk rather than run for the ball. And then after their walking football match each week, there was time for social connection. There was, tea, coffee and chat. And we wanted to see what impact that would have, as I've said, on physical health, on social connectedness. You can see from the picture, particularly in the top left, just how much enjoyment the participants got from this. It was a phenomenal intervention to be part of, I have to say. It was, incredibly gratifying, in fact, to be part of this study. And in brief, I would tell you that the results were overwhelmingly positive. We found that there was a positive impact on physical health. We also conducted focus groups after the intervention with the participants, and the feedback from them was, again, incredibly positive. And in particular, what they were telling us was that it did enable them to gel as a group, to make friends, to feel more, less socially isolated, more socially connected, etc. And it also highlights, I think, the importance, I think, in behavioural science, it's vital that any intervention is assessed before it's rolled out, that a feasibility study takes place, that it's thoroughly researched, that an intervention is conducted rigorously, and that it's rigorously tested. But the intervention itself doesn't have to be complicated. This was a really simple, really straightforward intervention, but its impact was absolutely massive. Now, I'm aware, I'm just glancing at my phone here, I'm aware that I'm just coming up to half an hour, and I want there to be time for chat and discussion. So I'm going to move on fairly quickly, but I do want to share with you a very short video that was made about this walking football intervention. So bear with me while I just share that particular screen. Here we go. Now, hopefully, if I
just put yourself on mute, Aiden.
so sorry. If I mute and stop my video, you should be able to see and hear this. It lasts for 2.5 minutes. This was an event that we organised at the culmination of the walking football intervention. It just gives you an idea as to what it meant to the participants and how it worked in practice. So hopefully you'll be able to see and hear this.
We don't have any sound, Aiden. We have got picture. That's it, thank you.
We're delighted to be here today in the National Sports Campus in this beautiful arena for this walking football event that we've organised with the FAI for European Week of Sport. So behind me here you can see a range of older people who have come up to try out walking football. Some of them have played before, but some of them haven't. And there's people here from men's sheds, from ICA groups, and from active retirement groups from around Dublin and Kildare. And by the looks of things, they're all having a good time.
Well, I find that walking football is great for a great fun way for keeping active.
Great fun, and it's an incentive to keep fit as well. I do the walking between the games in an effort to keep up a certain standard and a level of fitness, and I'm really enjoying it. Meet people and meet new people, and at our stage in life it's a bonus to be meeting people, and it gets you out and about.
So that just gives you, as I've said, an idea as to one of the projects that we have been involved with and how that looked and worked in practice. Let me just go back to my other screen. Here we go. So the second, I'll finish on this. The second study that I just wanted to briefly mention is a study that we're currently involved with. We have €1.4 million in funding from the Higher Education Authority of Ireland, and this is being used for a programme that's focused on graduate employability called Transform-EDU. What we're essentially looking to do is ensure as best we can that graduates from TU Dublin are developing a rounded skill set, because I think, as we all know, graduates, young people who are graduating from college today, unlike those of us who did in the past, are unlikely to have, a job for life. The world is becoming much more connected, and there are new skills that are required in the workplace, and the workplace is becoming much more, multicultural. So what we wanted to do is ensure that graduates from TU Dublin had this rounded skill set that would enable them to, I suppose, when they start work, have this 21st century graduate profile. So in brief, what it involves is offering students on a co-curricular and an extracurricular basis a range of workshops and events that they can sign up to in a number of discrete areas. And there's, civic engagement, leadership, a couple of areas, but one of those is social and emotional skills development, which is obviously the aspect that we're involved in through PEEI. So what we do is we offer modules to students at each level of study, first, second and final year. First year students are offered the chance to take part in modules in mindfulness, second years in group-based emotional intelligence coaching, and then final years get work readiness coaching. So we have preliminary results at the moment. It's a study that's ongoing. We have an article that's in review at the moment. We've another that we've just finished writing. So watch this space. Preliminary results have found that for students who have taken part in the first and second year workshops, there were statistically significant decreases in perceived stress. For those that took the mindfulness workshops, statistically significant increases in EI for participants who took the EI coaching workshops. And again, we conducted focus groups as well, and there was positive feedback gleaned through those. But the final year students, what we're doing with the final year students is a little bit more involved. What we've done is conducted initially a survey of Irish employers that was conducted earlier this year. And there were 128 employers who were sent a questionnaire, and then there were follow-up interviews with 22 of them in 5 discrete areas. You can see what they are on the screen. And essentially, we asked them, 2 main areas. How important is it for graduates right now to possess social and emotional skills? And to what extent do you believe current graduates possess those important social and emotional skills for the workplace? There were some differences. Again, I don't have time to go into them, right now, but if you check out our website, there's, further information about all of our research there. There were some differences with respect to what employers in the different sectors felt were the most important skills, social and emotional skills that graduates should possess, and the level to which they currently believe that graduates are displaying those, are in possession of those as they enter the workforce. So following from the survey, we designed specific workshops to enable students to develop the skills where employers felt there were deficits. Students have the option to attend these workshops, and then after they've done so, the students, and the workshops are employer-led, so employers come in to help us deliver the workshops to speak about the importance of social and emotional skills in their workplace, how they specifically manifest in work contexts, and so on. So they are, employer-led. And then following from that, the students are offered mock competency-based interviews with an employer in their field of study, and they get feedback on that. So, as I've said, overall, to try and help students to develop a rounded skill set and to prepare them for entry to the workforce. So, an example of a study that we've previously conducted, one that we're currently conducting, again, just to give an example of, how we conduct our research and how that applies in practice. I wasn't entirely sure what level of knowledge, people would have as to emotional intelligence. So I thought it would be good to show not only what emotional intelligence is, but how it might work in practice in research contexts. Very lastly, this is a list of, other research projects, ongoing projects that we're involved with at the moment. Again, there's further information about all of this on our website, so please do check that out. So finally, I would sincerely like to say that I genuinely am very grateful to have had the opportunity to speak about emotional intelligence, to share my passion for emotional intelligence, and to tell you a little bit about PEEI and what we do. Very genuinely, I really am always happy to discuss my work, to discuss any aspect of psychology whatsoever, at any level of engagement with anybody who would like to do so. So please do feel free to reach out and contact me. My email address is on the screen. I should have put my LinkedIn information there, but if you search for me through LinkedIn, you will find me, and my work phone number is there too. So I do hope that this has been of interest and of some value to you. I'm really looking forward to hearing comments and chatting with anybody who has any questions. And thank you again for listening.
Thank you so much, Aiden. That was both interesting, practical, and I'm sure many of you will agree that with that video, it was actually quite joyful. I saw many of you smiling as we saw the rather elderly people on that film. It was really a very positive experience. Thank you so much, Aiden. Extremely interesting for me personally. And as usual, there's been a rash of very thoughtful questions from all of our hyper intelligent members. And so the ones that I saw sort of popping up as we went along, I'm going to be bringing Tony, I'm going to be bringing in Kathleen, Alessandro and Arth. So first of all, Tony, if you'd like to join us. Quite early on in the presentation, you were asking questions about how do we measure the different levels, be it nature or nurture. Would you like to expand on that, Tony? And you're very welcome.
Well, yeah, I guess that was my question. And first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Sometimes I'm just sort of like vibrating with excitement when you're talking about some of these things.
You're very welcome. That's lovely to hear. Thank you.
So, nature and nurture, I mean, that's kind of the question. And so, having had my own children, they sort of emerge from the womb with their own personalities, and they're cranky or they're friendly, and so that's kind of argues for nature, but then they build on that. So, but is emotional intelligence, I mean, do they have any feel for how much is genetic versus how much is environment?
There are, we could spend, gosh, way more than an hour just teasing out, that an answer to that one question. I don't think there is, one particular correct answer to that question. Certainly what we know from research in the field of personality is that there are some aspects of personality that are more strongly genetically hardwired than others. So you might have heard of the Big Five, for example. Is that a concept that's familiar?
I have, but if you asked me to tell you what those were, I couldn't tell you. So
essentially, these are 5 aspects of personality: openness to new experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So these are, and absolutely, Ocean is the mnemonic that you can use to remember them. And these are generally considered the most stable across the lifespan. So I think there are a couple of issues here. Firstly, there are likely to be aspects of emotional intelligence that are a little more strongly hardwired than others. But it's very difficult, to be honest, to tease out exactly, what the genetic versus the social level of programming, if you like, is going to be. What we do know, there isn't a huge amount of work that's been done in this regard, but what we do know is that, at least to some extent, and this is what's most important, is that emotional intelligence can be coached, it can be improved, and sometimes the improvements can be, quite dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, it's good to know I can improve,
Now, I don't believe I've answered that question because, as I've said, I don't think there actually is one answer to that question.
Okay, well, good enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Tony. Now, Kathleen, if you'd like to join us, you were asking a question in relation to, I presume he's an author who I'm familiar with, Paul Bloom. Kathleen, you're very welcome.
Hello. Oh, there.
Hello.
Yeah. So yesterday I was listening to a podcast and it happened to have Paul Bloom on there, who is a psychologist, and I think he works in a similar area. And he's written a book called Against Empathy. So, one person put on there, or I guess several people put on, that emotional intelligence is empathy. And I think that a lot of us, me included, thought that was the main component. So I was really happy to see that really long list of things, and you emphasizing self-actualization and stuff, because his idea is that empathy can actually lead to immoral and dangerous behavior, because we focus our empathy primarily on people we like.
Sure.
Or if you are a psychopath, you can use it for all sorts of things. So I was just wondering if you had read his book or knew about that, or what your thoughts were.
It's a really interesting question, and a really interesting concept, and I'm glad that you've raised it, because I think what it highlights is that it's not, automatically, it's not a given that if you have a high level of emotional intelligence that you're going to, always act in a morally upstanding fashion, should we say. So I think first, I'm going to take a step back before I take a step forward. I think it's important to recognize that for all of us, we're going to have an EI profile, just as with cognitive intelligence. For each of those different components of emotional intelligence, we'll have individual scores. And for all of us, some of those scores will be higher than others. So that's the first thing I think that we need to recognize here. The second most important thing that we need to recognize, which is the very point that you're raising, is that, there is a difference between, we need to be conscious of what the EI capacities that people have are, but how they put them into practice is another thing. So you can have a number of people, for example, who may have very similar EI profiles, but how they use those in practice, may differ widely. So empathy, for example, is a key skill. That many tricksters, will rely on. It's a key skill that's required for people who work in sales, for example, but it's also obviously a key skill, for people who work in, helping professions in the humanities, etc. So I think we need to distinguish between the skill itself and how it's put into practice. And things get, a little more tricky, when we think, along those lines. But I think it's something that we do need to be conscious of at an individual level, and indeed at a societal level. So, I suppose a related, area that this applies to would be education. And even looking at, let's say, cultural norms, looking at, law and order, etc. So how is it that we're, I suppose, at a societal level, encouraging people to act, to behave? What is it that we're valuing, as a society, as a group, or as an individual? And there's, again, we could spend an entire weekend talking about just this, but it's a very important and interesting question that you've raised.
Thank you. Good answer. Great answer.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's nice to see Kathleen satisfied with an answer, because she certainly likes to grill our guests to the full extent. So you did well there, Aiden.
Oh, I'm gratified.
Now, I'd like to bring in Alessandro, who asked a very interesting question about how we can develop our EI. Alessandro, would you like to join us?
Yeah, thank you. And maybe by answering to Tony's question, you have already given me some clue about my question. So my question was more about, okay, I'm going to develop my emotional intelligence. When I'm developing my emotional intelligence by, for example, your coaching sessions, I'm able to modify my genetic material at the point that I'm able to pass these special genes to the next generation. So that my children are already equipped with these, let's say, emotional skills, rather than starting from scratch to build again the emotional skills by your coaching sessions.
That's a very interesting question. I don't believe that it is possible through coaching or through personal effort, to change what our basic genetic makeup is. But I think it's important to recognize that we pass information from generation to generation, not just genetically, but also, socially, communicatively, through, education, etc. So in that regard, I certainly think that there's, massive potential to, impact future generations. So I think that would be, in my opinion, where it would be possible for the greatest impact to take place.
Thank you.
Would you agree or
Um,
disagree with that?
To be honest, it's difficult for me because I really like the concept of epigenetics, where I'm
Sure.
gonna be able to modify my genetic material based on the environment, based on like external input. But obviously, I don't have any knowledge, so it's difficult for me to say I agree or disagree. But I take your explanation as a valuable for my future, for the future, because I know that most of the time we learn something and we can pass to the next generation, the children, by teaching them what to do and what not to do. But I was wondering whether or not we can take advantage of my personal experience now for the future, rather than starting teaching again something that maybe takes a lot of time, rather than born with these skills. But it's difficult for me to say yes, I agree or disagree. For sure, what I can teach to my children is going to influence them based on what I'm learning now. So that's I agree 100%.
The interesting thing, working in the area that I do, is that most of the questions that we get asked, not just me, but fellow researchers in my area, there are no correct, let's say, answers to. I think what's often important is that the question is being asked, and that we are continuing to ask that question and to reflect on these issues and how they apply, because sometimes they will differ they will be context dependent as well. So I think what's most important is that we are asking these questions and having ongoing conversations about them. Certainly, yes. I just saw a comment pop up there from someone mentioning that their children seem to be benefiting, from their emotional skills, and obviously, for children, their primary role models are whoever their primary carers are, usually their parents, but of course not always, and that they will be very much impacted by the environment in which they're raised. So I think raising a child and from a young age helping children to become emotionally aware is possibly one of the greatest gifts that we can give them.
Agree. Thank you so much for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro, for that very interesting question. Now, a little way back, Arth, you were asking a practical question about the project that Aiden had worked on. Would you like to join us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Louise. Thanks, Aiden, for such an interesting talk. I was particularly interested in when you talked about the walking football, and you were looking into the impact of your intervention in terms of the physical and social connectivity. So I was wondering, what were the positive measures that you used to gauge this intervention as a success?
Sure. There were, as I said, there were a range of measures that we employed, and it was a mixed methods design. So we collected both quantitative and qualitative data. So before and following the intervention, we took a range of physical measures. So all of the participants had their resting heart rate following exertion, blood pressure and so on. They had their flexibility tested, etc. And then we tested that again following the intervention. They completed a questionnaire, which was a test of perceived social connectedness, So the sorts of questions that we were asking them were along the lines of, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, so in the past day, in the past week, in the past month, at what level have you engaged with? Have you had a conversation with a member of your immediate family, a neighbour, a friend, etc.? Have you sat down and had some kind of interaction personally with each of these groups, etc.? And then we tested that again following the intervention. So like I said, it was a simple test-retest design. So kind of quasi-experimental. We didn't have a control group. I think it's very important, by the way, when you're conducting any form of research, that you're always very upfront about any limitations that pertain to it. But for this particular group, what we did find was that there were increases in the number of social interactions that they had. Interestingly, by the way, not just with the other people who were in the walking football intervention. So it wasn't just that they started to engage with that group of people. They actually, a lot of them, and when we conducted focus groups with them, and when we conducted the focus groups, they were saying that it just gave them a new sense of purpose, and that they ended up also having more conversations with their neighbours, with their families, etc. Just as an aside, one wonderful moment that I recall from that study, at one of the post-match tea, coffee, chat sessions, there was a sing-song. Randomly, someone started to sing, somebody joined in, and suddenly, that this party atmosphere developed, and everybody was kind of singing. It really was, a wonderful study to be part of, and it was really gratifying. So yeah, I hope that answers your questions. These were the measures that we used.
Although I would be curious, did you do, after the intervention, so a while has passed since the intervention, and gone back and see how long this positive impact has, stayed with the subjects?
Sadly, no. I would love to be able to say that we did. We didn't have the resources to be able to do so. But I do know that following the intervention, the Football Association of Ireland now have walking football clubs pretty much throughout Ireland. It's absolutely wonderful. Just one other interesting finding was we set out particularly to target elder males, because there's a lot of research that's showing that this is a particularly socially isolated group. But we ran two versions of the intervention. We ran it twice. We started with one in Dublin, and then we had a second in another part of Ireland. And for the second one, basically word had spread, and there were a number of women who were contacting us asking, can we join too? So the second one was a mixed sex walking football intervention. And when we conducted a focus group with this group of participants, one of the strongest findings, in fact, was that they really enjoyed the fact that there were both men and women involved. So I think targeted interventions have a place. I certainly think there is a place for men only walking football, groups. But it was interesting as well that it was the second, mixed sex one that worked, and that the feedback was so positive that it was a mixed sex group.
Absolutely. Well done. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks for that super question, Arth. And we're getting very close to the end of the session. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Aiden. I'm sure, like myself, you've all been scribbling notes furiously. I've written down, you are unique in all the world. Tune out to our stress indicators. How do our core values materialize in our life? Self-actualization. I put a note there for the bar on model, and I'm going to ask Aiden if he doesn't mind if we share the deck in the group. I do have a copy of it. Can that be shared, Aiden?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, please do.
Super.
Absolutely
Thank
free.
you so much. So I will put that deck into the group in LinkedIn so that you can see it. And I suppose just finally, Aiden, as I said, my reading is as I said, a very, very old book. Have you any recommendations for any either people who might be interesting besides yourself to follow on this subject, or maybe current authors writing on this subject?
Gosh, there are quite a few. If you check out the London Psychometric Laboratory, they are doing fantastic work. If you just do it like a web search, you'll find them. There's also the EI Consortium in the USA. Again, you know, a simple web search, you know, will bring them up. So I think they would certainly be two very good places to start. Dan Goleman as well, the author of the book that you have, Louise. I mean, he's published, you know, a number of other texts as well, and he certainly would be one of the most well-known researchers in the field. So there are, you know, more current texts that he's produced too.
Thank you so much, Aidan. Thank you to all of our members who have joined us for this particular conversation this week with Aidan. Just before you go, to let you know that next week we are going to be joined by, forgive me if I pronounce this incorrectly, Paramaswaran Venkataraman. And Paramaswaran is the Chief Design Officer at Fractal Analytics. So I'm sure it's going to be extremely exciting conversation again next week. So we hope that you will all join us, and just as I thank Aidan and hope that you'll join us next week. Thank you very much, Aidan, and see you all next week.
You're very welcome.
Bye now.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you. Goodbye.